I'm going to go over the next 7 days. I'm going to do a new series that is actually on the insights that I learned from my experience with cancer. Many of you probably don't know that I almost died of cancer 4.5 years ago. And obviously, when you go through something like that, it shakes you up and it helps you to look at things in a new way. And people have asked me multiple occasions, Father, how do you deal with suffering? How do you deal with major changes in your life? How do you deal with facing death? And it's something that it really can scare us to a certain extent, because it's the greatest fear that strikes the heart of every human person. Is the reality that I'm going to die, that I'm going to pass away, and this world is going to come to an end. What comes after? What is going to last? What's not going to last? What's important? What's not in light of eternity? It always reminds me of that phrase from Seneca, early philosopher, pagan philosopher who lived around the same time as Jesus. And he wrote, quid facies respice ad mortem, which in Latin means, whatever you do, look towards death, look towards the end. And I think this is what we're going to try to, not in a morbid way, but looking at what are the lessons and insights that God wants to give to us through the reality of death. So stay tuned over the next 7 days. God bless. I have two friends who are dying of cancer right now, and I still have cancer because I have an incurable cancer. It happens to be in remission right now, multiple myeloma. I was talking with one of these friends the other day, and she was sharing with me how difficult it is going through the chemo, loss of appetite, lack of energy, the fatigue, the feeling rotten, the nausea, everything that you go through when you're suffering from a physical illness, and that is unpleasant. And I think for most of us, we try to hide and turn away from the suffering that we experience in life. We pretend it doesn't exist. When we see someone who's suffering, we kind of turn the other way. We don't know what to say. Our words seem to fall short. And this is the reality of human suffering. And yet it's precisely in these key moments of life where we begin to see what life is all about. That it's not merely going from one titillating experience to the next. It's not merely going from one success to the next, because ultimately we are all going to die. And if we don't understand the reality of death, we won't know how to live properly. And so stay tuned. We'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about the same. So yesterday I was sharing with you that I have two friends who are dying of cancer right now. This really profound conversation with one of them the other day. She was telling me about her suffering, the difficulties she's going through. But at one point she shared with me something that I had actually talked with her about a few years ago when I was going through my own cancer treatments. And I said, there's something beautiful that takes place in the midst of suffering when that suffering is offered to Christ and it's offered for the sake of others. It doesn't take away the nastiness, the suffering, the misery, and the human reality. You don't want to suffer. I mean, you'd be a masochist if you wanted to suffer. But the reality is that as a Christian, we can look to the cross, and I have this crucifix right behind me here. When we look at the cross, we see a God who has chosen to suffer for us. I mean, we, in all of our sinfulness, we kind of deserve suffering. We just deserve the punishment that we receive. But God took upon himself and chose for himself to suffer out of love for us. And when we offer our suffering back to him, that transforms the suffering, gives a sense of purpose and meaning, and a closeness and an intimacy that only the saints can really understand. When you read this in the writings of the saints, when they talk about the beauty of suffering from a merely human rational standpoint, it's ludicrous. But when we see that in the context of the cross and the crucifix of Jesus Christ, who has loved us and suffered for us, it all starts to come into perspective. As I mentioned before, I have multiple myeloma, which is an incurable type of bone marrow blood cancer. And I've had went through chemo, went through a bone marrow transplant. And through all of that experience, tremendous physical suffering, the physical suffering of going through various medical procedures, putting chest port in, the chemo, plasmapheresis and dialysis on a regular basis for several months. All of that was just nothing really in comparison with the psychological suffering. And I don't say that lightly. When you feel like you are a burden upon other people, when you feel like your life doesn't have purpose and meaning. I mean, I understood when I was going through my cancer treatments, the reality that some people want to commit suicide and do commit suicide when they're going through cancer treatments, because you feel a sense of the weight, the suffering, and when is it going to go away? Is anything going to change? And in those darkest moments, that's when the stars shine the brightest. And that's when the light of Christ is most significant. I think sometimes that's why God allows suffering in our lives, so that we can put things back into perspective and we can see once again those pinpoints of light, those stars in the sky, the presence of God, that He is with us. He never abandons us. Okay, I know. You're just thinking, Father, you're never going to finish this in seven series. Okay, I'm not. It's not going to be a series of seven. I lied at the beginning. I didn't intentionally lie, but it's just there's so much that is coming out. I want to unpack for you. But I'm going to tell you the first lesson that I learned from cancer today. The first lesson, and the most important one, is to let myself be loved by God and by others. Now, I know that sounds kind of silly. I mean, yes, of course, we need to let ourselves be loved by others, but I'm a man, okay? I don't want to show weakness. I don't want to show that I need others. And for my whole life long, I have been driven, trying to accomplish things, succeed, show others that I've got it all together. None of us like to show our weak side. But yet when you go through cancer, you are weak, physically weak. You're exhausted. There's things you can't do. I mean, there are times I just literally tripped over my own feet and fell on the ground. There are times where, when I was going through the recovery from the bone marrow transplant, where my whole GI system was destroyed and I had to wear a diaper, an adult diaper. There's nothing more humiliating for man than not be able to control his own bowels. And even when I was right next to the bathroom, I couldn't make it sometimes. And cleaning up after that mess is disgusting. And so learning through that humiliation to allow others to serve me and to care for me, to allow others to love me, that was hard. But it's beautiful, and it's an important lesson we all need to learn in our lives. Yesterday, I shared a pretty vulnerable moment in going through my cancer and that need to learn how to receive the love of God and of others, the receptivity. A second lesson that I learned from my experience with cancer is that I needed to learn how to express my love for others. Now, as a seminarian and priest, I entered the seminary when I was 17 years old. I dated girls in high school, had normal relations with women, with other people, family, friends. But I've always been a little bit guarded. Part of that is my German upbringing. Part of that is kind of the stoic Iowa way of living life that I grew up with, the hardworking farmer ethic. But part of it too is just the reality of my own personality. And I needed to learn the lesson of telling other people that I love them. This came across in part when before I was diagnosed with cancer, I had a heart attack too. So, okay, yeah, you're thinking, what kind of complicated medical history does this guy have? But anyway, when my mom came to the hospital, I told her on the phone right before she arrived, she said, "I love you," saying goodbye. And then I said, "Oh, I love you too, Mom." Well, she showed up a few hours later at the hospital. She said, "Father Daniel," she kicked everyone else out of the room. And she said, "Father Daniel, that's the first time in 15 years that you've told me that you love me." And we both broke down and started crying. I just haven't been very good at expressing my love to other people. And we all need to learn how to do that. So tell someone today that you love them. Don't just assume that they know it. And God bless you. Okay, yesterday I shared the second lesson that I learned from cancer was to express my love and care for others and show gratitude for the gift that they are in my life. There's so much more I could say about this, but I'm going to move on to the third lesson, which is people over projects. Now, as many of you who know me, you know that I'm a pretty driven person. I can be a little bit intense at times, a little intimidating for others, and I like to get things done. In the Clifton strengths, my number one strength is that of achiever. I like to make things happen, accomplish things, and I drive a sense of purpose from that. Now, that is good for getting things done, but it's not necessarily good when you need to cultivate relationships with people and be engaged with people and have a healthy balance in your life. And one of the lessons that I learned from cancer was to begin to put people before projects. That is, to recognize the people around me, to make time for friends, because you don't know when you're going to pass or when a friend is going to die. And over these last few years, I can't say that I've been 100% on this, but I've gotten better. I make time every year, and I go on a camping trip with my best friend from grade school and high school, Blake Mertz. I try to take time to reach out to and call friends. I even put a time in my schedule every week on Saturdays, call friends. And it's been so good for my heart. And all of us need to learn how to do that, to Put people who are more important than projects. Put people first. Love the people who are in your life, and don't be afraid to express that to them. God bless you. Whew. Well, the fourth lesson that I learned from cancer is really a doozy. And it really strikes at the heart, again, of what I mentioned yesterday, as far as my drive to achieve, to accomplish things, make things happen. I needed to learn that my worth as a person comes not so much from what I do, my accomplishments, my laurels, but from who I am. This is so important for me because, in different moments in my life, I was afraid of failure because if I felt that if I failed at anything, that I was a failure. So my self-worth is so tied up in what I accomplish and what I do or what I'm not able to do. And when you go through cancer, you stop being able to do hardly anything. I mean, it's an accomplishment just to eat a meal. It's an accomplishment to get to a doctor's appointment. I remember in the lowest moments when I was going through recovering from the bone marrow transplant. I was in the hospital, Emory Hospital here in Atlanta, and there was a deacon who was taking care of me, Deacon Jared Laura, who was so charitable during that time. But he would help me, and we would set simple goals for the day. Which were, get out of bed, call my parents. And they were very simple. Celebrate Mass. Those were the simple goals that I had every day. And through that whole process of detaching from the things that I could do, there was a greater and greater sense of being, of just being in the Lord, of rooting my existence, my identity in God's love for me and my existence more so in the things that I was accomplishing. And this helps us a lot in our lives. So a very important lesson that I learned. Hopefully you can learn it before you have to go through cancer. Now, this fifth and final lesson that I learned from the experience of cancer, it may take me a couple sessions to explain this one because it's really deep. So for today, at least, let me enunciate what it is. The fifth lesson from cancer was the priestly power of prayer and suffering. And I say that in the broadest sense. I'm obviously a Catholic priest, and when I offer my suffering, I offer up the sacrifice of the Mass. There's a tremendous power, the infinite power of Jesus Christ in that. But every baptized Christian is a priest, prophet, and king. The common priesthood of all the faithful that we talk about in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we learned as kids, this common priesthood of all the faithful stems from our baptism. And what does that mean? What does a priest do? In the Old Testament and all ancient religions, a priest would offer up sacrifices. He intercedes between God and the people in order to draw them closer together, intercedes for them, but primarily a sacrifice is made. Sometimes it's bread, sometimes it's animals, sometimes it was even human sacrifices in other ancient religions. But all of these priests would offer up a sacrifice to appease the gods. In the New Dispensation, in the New Testament, this sacrifice that we offer up in the common priesthood is to offer up our own sufferings, offer up our prayers, to intercede, to reach out to God for ourselves and for others. Stay tuned for tomorrow. I'll complete the picture. Yesterday, I was sharing a little bit about the fifth lesson I learned from cancer, which is the priestly power of prayer and suffering that all of us have in the common priesthood. But I learned it in a special way because, some of those prior lessons that I learned, that my identity is so attached to what I do and what do I accomplish. When you're going through cancer and you can't do anything, I couldn't do my normal ministry. I would so fatigue. I tried one time to go hear confessions, and it just about killed me. I actually got pneumonia a couple days later because it was so weak in my body. I couldn't do the things that I normally do, but I was praying for people. And a lot of people were reaching out on social media, through other means, asking for my prayers, asking for my intercession. And I would just go through and I would pray and say, Lord, I offer my suffering today for this person. I pray for this person who's asked for my prayers. I intercede for this other person who's I heard about who's suffering, worse than I am at this moment. And little by little, I started to hear back from some of these people. And there were literally miracles that took place. Not thanks to me, but thanks to God's grace working through me. And this is a beautiful thing that gives a sense of purpose and meaning to every single one of us who suffers in our life. Unite your suffering with Christ. As we say colloquially as Catholics, offer it up. It's not just a pious phrase, and it's not just a suck it up type of phrase. It's an offer it up to Jesus, because through, as St. Paul says in the New Testament, he says, I unite my suffering with that of Christ for the sake of his body, the church, to make up that which is lacking in the suffering of Christ. I mean, if St. Paul hadn't said it, we would think it's heretical. But our sufferings united to Christ have tremendous power and grace for others and for ourselves. I want to complete one last thought from that fifth lesson that I was sharing the last couple of days, that the priestly power of prayer and suffering. Those moments when I was going through cancer treatments and suffering tremendously physically, psychologically, without a doubt, I can say those were the most fruitful moments of my priesthood. I've preached a lot. I've been on missions. I've directed works of apostolate and important international projects. But the most fruitful part of my priesthood has been when I have suffered, not done anything, but simply suffered and prayed for others. And the intimacy that I felt with Jesus Christ by offering up that suffering, being united to him, was a blessing and a grace that I would trade anything for. I mean, I don't want to go through the suffering that I went through again, but if the Lord offered that to me and gave that to me and said that would bear good fruit for the church and for souls, I'd do it in a heartbeat. And maybe I will have to go through that again, because the type of cancer that I have, multiple myeloma, has a high recurrence rate, could come back at any time. I have to go in for blood work every 3 months or so, a regular annual checkup for my bone marrow biopsy. And those are painful things, and it's kind of a nuisance. And the cancer can come back, but I'm not afraid of that. And I'm not afraid of suffering, because I've experienced that in offering our suffering to the Lord, we can experience the greatest joy. So don't be afraid of the suffering in your life. Instead, turn to the Lord, because perfect love casts out all fear. And united to Christ, we can do all things. God bless you. Over the last week or more, I've been sharing some insights on the lessons I learned from cancer. Cancer is it's a nasty thing. It's the big C word that so many people are afraid of. But I don't think it's something we need to be afraid of. I don't think we need to be afraid of any other C word, whether it's COVID or cancer or any other sickness or cold. Those are the three big C's that we're all going through during this time. We don't need to be afraid of sickness. We don't need to be afraid of death. What we need to be afraid of is sin, because sin is the only thing that can separate us from eternal life, from God who loves us. Nothing else can. Death can't separate us from Christ. And so why are we afraid of those things that just kill the body, and we're not afraid of those things that kill the soul? We should put so much more emphasis upon trying to stay away from sin, protect people from sin, and live a life full of grace and closeness to God's love and his friendship. So today, if you need to change perspective, maybe set aside the fears that have held you prisoner, and instead delve into the courage and courageousness that comes from Christ and the love of God, well, do that. And get your focus on the right things. Be afraid of those who can kill the soul, not those who can kill the body. God bless you. Okay, I promise this is going to be my last post about the lessons I learned from cancer, at least for this time. But hopefully these have been some good insights for each one of you. And those of us who suffer, which is all of us, have found some insight that can help us to live our life better with less fear. And for those of you who are suffering, those of you who are struggling with some sickness or illness or mental illness or loss of a job or difficulty right now, don't be afraid. Christ is the one who gives us the strength to get through anything. Don't isolate yourself from others. Reach out to those that you love, those who love you. Receive their help and their grace, because it's through this humiliation, this suffering, that so many graces can come into our lives. I have no doubt that cancer was a tremendous blessing in my life. I'm a better man. I'm a better priest because of it. And through suffering, God can forge us and mold us into being better men and women, better Christians who know him and experience his love and can share that with others. God bless you.